Well, today we round out week 38, day 6, with yet the beginning of another book. In this instance, we're going to read the first 5 chapters of the story Esther. Now, Esther is unique among all the books in the Bible in that it never mentions God by name. Instead, what we have here is a court story that takes place in the Persian Empire. While we know that all of the Jews were exiled out of Jerusalem to Babylon, except for a small remnant, including the prophet Jeremiah, there were, in fact, a far number of Jews who never returned to Jerusalem, but stayed relatively content in the lands that they had been placed during the exile. First the Babylonians, now the Persians are in power. And so we see this story follows the events of what occurred for some Jews who did not return to Jerusalem. There's a lot of rich irony that takes place here. Esther is the Persian name of a young woman by the name of Hadassah, who has been raised by her uncle Mordecai. And what we see here is Esther rising to power to become queen of Persia. Well, the irony is she ends up the queen of Persia because the previous queen refused to obey when the king called. And so we see a difference in what happens when we are obedient or not obedient. Ultimately, this story is a celebration of how God can use the most unlikely of heroes to deliver his people. Nobody in this time would have ever expected a young girl, much less a young Jewish girl, to be able to save her people in the midst of the mighty Persian Empire and in the royal courts thereof. You know, what is it that we might be called to that seems very unlikely because we're not fill in the blank? We're not rich, we're not powerful, we're not whatever it might be. And yet, that doesn't preclude us from being used in God's mission and by God's power and might. What is God calling you and me to do today?